Clock out west. I'm Anna Cabrera in New York. You are live in the CNN newsroom. Thanks for being with me. We have breaking news on this Sunday here on CNN. The United States military has shot down a warplane in Syria. It is the first time this has happened since the U.S. took an active role in the Syrian conflict. Now, the plane was shot down. It was a Syrian regime bomber, we're learning, that is said to have attacked coalition-supported fighters on the ground. This is where it happened, near the city of Raqqa, the ISIS stronghold in northern Syria. Now, a statement from the coalition, which is led by the United States, said its forces were responding to the Syrian bombing, which did cause casualties on the ground, and that the Syrian jet was shot down in self-defense. Again, the U.S. military, for the first time, has shot down a Syrian Air Force warplane. We are closely following these developments. Stay with CNN for more details as we get them. Turning to politics now, and I want to get to some other breaking news from the Pacific now. The worst possible result from the weekend's frantic search for those 7 American sailors unaccounted for after a collision at sea. Those sailors have been found. Sadly, they did not survive the accident. Their ship, the USS Fitzgerald, is now back in port after colliding with a much larger cargo ship in waters off Japan. Parts of the destroyer flooded with seawater, and it's in those flooded compartments that recovery divers found the sailors that were missing for more than 24 hours. Our military analyst, retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral John Kirby, is joining us now. Admiral, you and I spoke yesterday about this situation. We discussed this possible scenario and outcome. We learned that this collision happened while most of the crew on board was asleep. What are your thoughts about this tragedy today?
Well, it's just absolutely heartrending. And I want to start just by offering again my thoughts and prayers to everybody aboard Fitzgerald, all the crew and their families, not, of course, in particular, the families of these 7 sailors that were lost. It's just a heartbreaking outcome to a horrible tragedy. It doesn't surprise me that some of the casualties were found in berthing compartments at 2:30 in the morning, which is where I think this happened, in the middle of the night. You would expect most of the crew to be asleep. There's obviously some crew that are up standing watch and driving the ship and navigating it, but most of the crew would be asleep at that time of day.
Admiral, the 7th Fleet commander said today that this collision had the potential to sink the Fitzgerald, but that the crew scrambled. They were able to keep her afloat. I know you've served at sea. What happens on board in an emergency situation like this?
Everybody aboard a ship is a fireman. Everybody aboard a ship is trained to fight floods. That's what you do. It's called damage control. And everybody in the Navy, from the time from almost the first day you join, you learn basic techniques about how to preserve safety and security of a ship at sea. And it's something that always comes back to you throughout your career. You constantly go through this training, particularly on small warships like destroyers. And I think, you know, when all is said and done, the investigation's over, when stories can finally be told, I think you're going to hear dozens of stories of incredible bravery and skill and teamwork to keep that ship afloat and to keep her from foundering. The strike below the waterline had to have been massive because those freighters have these big bulbous bows. You can't see them on the top of the water, but underneath they're very bulbous. Probably just punctured right through, made terrific damage, and that they were able to keep that ship afloat really is truly a story of great heroism.
And we know that they knocked out the communication systems that they were using, so there was that additional challenge they were facing. Really is amazing. They were able to get it back to shore, and it wasn't any worse.
No, it is. And I would just, if you could just give me a second, just to also mention that our Japanese partners, our allies, the Japanese Coast Guard, which came right to the scene and right to the rescue. And from talking to my former friends in the Navy, they tell me that without the Japanese help, this would have been even worse.
I do want to ask you about the investigation real quick and how it would proceed, because you wrote in an op-ed some pretty strong words. I know you feel strongly about how this is going to shake out, saying careers will be dashed, people will be punished short of battle at sea. Navy warships are not supposed to hit anything, not the ground, not each other, and certainly not container ships in the middle of the night. So how do you see the investigation proceeding?
There is a strong culture of accountability in the Navy, particularly for those who command at sea, and it is an absolute accountability. There's no getting around that. This investigation, which is just now getting started, will be run by another admiral, not the 7th Fleet commander, but somebody that he chooses. It'll be thorough, it'll be definitive, it'll be decisive, it'll be very, very complete. They will do a complete forensic analysis of what happened, almost minute by minute. They'll talk to every relevant witness. They'll look at every piece of equipment, such as the radar system that could have been involved in whether make sure it was operating or not. They will look at every bit of recorded data, because there'll be some electronically recorded data that they can assess, almost like a black box kind of thing. They'll look at it all, and they'll be able to determine exactly what happened. just as importantly, Anna, they'll be able to determine what didn't happen. In other words, what decisions should have been made at certain periods of time and weren't. And did that lead to this catastrophe?
Okay, now I'll have you here, Admiral. This breaking news about the U.S. shooting down a Syrian Air Force jet. This is the first time this has happened, although coalition partners have engaged in direct combat in the skies over Syria. But how big of a development is this in the coalition's war against ISIS?
I think we need to be careful in talking to this in terms of escalatory measures. A couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, this was done in defense of Syrian Democratic Forces that the coalition was supporting and has been supporting on the ground. That is a commitment that the coalition made a long time ago when we agreed to help these Syrian Democratic Forces on the ground. We made it very clear publicly, not just to them, but publicly, that if they came under fire, if they came under attack, we would come to their defense. So this was a long-standing understanding between the coalition and certainly the regime. Number two, I think you can look at this as a potentially a deterrent attack. In other words, they had to do this, but maybe it'll have a deterrent effect on the regime. I don't see this as escalatory. This was something that we committed to doing a long time ago, and we've sadly had to come through on it here.
How far up the chain of command would that decision have gone?
I don't know, since I'm not inside the chain of command anymore. I doubt it had to go very, very high. Again, the commander on the ground has the authority to defend his forces, and we have the authority to defend the forces that we're supporting on the ground. So I don't think this left theater. If you're asking if this sort of had to go to the Pentagon or had to come to Washington, I highly doubt that. I would suspect that the commander there in charge of the coalition ops had the authority to do this on his own.
Retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, thanks as always, and happy Father's Day. Thanks
Thank you so much
on your day.
Thank you.
Well, the fate of President Trump's travel ban is in the hands of the Supreme Court, and there will be developments this week. Will the justices save the ban, or will one of the president's signature promises be broken by the courts? That's ahead, live in the CNN newsroom.